Good day, everyone, from the great Pacific Northwest. A little bit cloudy today. Michael Campana ready to go. And those of you who have been with us all the time can see that we have a beautiful new template, and that was designed just for Stephen Sobieszczyk of the U.S. Geological Survey up in Portland. The art of good science communication. So we thought we'd kind of implement that with our template. Couple of tips now for webinar precipitation. Okay, I've got rain on my mind. That's appropriate. If you want to ask a question, and we will solicit questions, you'll see on your dashboard there's a question tab with a little arrow next to it, and you just click on that. That'll open up a question box. You can type in a question and then send it to us, and we will ask Stephen questions when he's done. We will also, and Lisa Butler is our controller today. In fact, she's the controller, and she may be calling on some of you to actually ask questions or comments live. So that may be a little surprise, but anyway. So don't forget now, if you're watching this as a registered person and not just looking at someone else's screen, you will be able to access the recording and the PDF of the PowerPoint within a week or 10 days or something like that. And so you'll be able to hear everything that Steve says in his presentation, as well as the Q&A. You will need a Dropbox account to do this, and those are free. So here's the program, very simple. I'm doing the introduction. Stephen comes on about a minute or two, and then we're going to have Q&A. And we want to thank our folks at Stantec for their support and providing the template. There's our speaker, and that's the cleanest picture of him I could find. Usually he's in the water and he's got mud on him and things like that. And so we insisted, Stephen, you need to present something that's suitable for this kind of event. Stephen is a scientist and a storyteller with the Oregon Water Science Center of the U.S. Geological Survey just up the road in Portland, Oregon. Very well known not only for his science, but for his storytelling. There's Lisa Butler. She's down there in Sacramento. She's got the controls, so she can shut us off anytime she wants. And there I am. You'll never shut me off, but you may shut my mic off. So anyway, if you have any webinar suggestions, we've got a couple of slots open for the remainder of this calendar year. So please just shoot me an email. And if you want to be a speaker, that's fine too. You don't need to go find someone else to do it. But if you have a good topic, please let me know what you'd like to do. Upcoming webinars, the next two, we've got Jerry Selkie, a good friend, former president of AWRA, talking about developing conceptual models for implementing integrated water resources management. That's going to be a real good one, just like all of them. And then we have an interesting one on July, catchment carbon offsets trials. This is by Craig Clifton, who works for Jacobs in Australia. And Craig is going to be a real good sport about this because he'll be doing it live. It'll be 3 a.m. in Victoria when he does this. So we want to thank Craig. That'll be interesting. Upcoming conferences, we've got our summer specialty conference, Improving Water Infrastructure Through Resilience. And that's going to be in Sparks, Nevada, which is just next door to Reno. And it'll be at the Nugget, which is right off I-80, literally. And in mid-September, we'll be in Beijing. So if you want to hear about water security, new technologies, strategies, policies, and institutions, come to Beijing in mid-September. You'll have a good time. So anyway, we want to thank you in advance for participating in this webinar. So now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Sobieszczyk, who's going to start telling us stories. Stephen.
All righty, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's show my screen and go. Okay, so generally when I give presentations, I encourage audience participation. So as Michael pointed out, there will be some times where I'll ask for folks to comment. So please raise your hand, and Lisa will help facilitate the audience engagement. But what I want to talk to you guys today is the art of good science communication. Now, depending on what communication product you're talking about, it could be anything from a social media post to a presentation to a infographic that you're doing to a report to a web page, whatever you're trying to develop, a lot of considerations need to go into that product to make it good. Today, I'm going to be focusing specifically on kind of the public speaking aspect of how to kind of improve your presence, your material, how you're actually going to relate to your audiences by considering what goes into you as a product and your presentation as a product. So to give everyone a little bit of background, I'm heavily involved in science communication world, but I also am a hydrologist by training. So this is the AWRA. So I can actually talk to you guys at any point you want about your study into the hypereik exchange between surface water and the phreatic zone in an unconfined aquifer in the Deschutes Basin. But me personally, I'd rather talk to you about how water seeps into the ground. Now, those are an example of, you take a topic that we like to talk about in the science world and how people normally think in the real world. So that's what I'm hoping to help present today, is get you from there to there, or at least get you considering from one place to the other. Now we're going to move into our first audience participation point. So when I talk about art, what do I mean? So let's start here. On your screen, what you see are some famous white paintings. Now, normally I would ask, if I had everybody in front of me, how do these paintings make you feel? So if anybody would please kindly chime in here and just give me a reaction. Like when you look at this as artwork, what do you think the artist was intending? How does this make you feel? What's your impression, like that first in one word, like what do you feel when you see this type of art? I'm gonna hold here for somebody to comment.
Right. Oh, great. So you're actually having people send us chats and asking comments. So Michael, do you want to go through those? People are getting back. If anybody'd like to talk, I'd be happy to open your mic. Just raise your hand.
Yeah, Mike, if you want to read off some reactions, I don't have the message thing up.
Okay, I don't see any reactions so far. Hold on a sec. I'll be right with you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm looking for someone who's...
We've got bored, bemused, bland, raw, fresh, waiting for something, simple, bored, yeah, I feel
Perfect.
blah, I just don't see much. And
now,
I've a lot of
with
comments.
all those reactions, which make perfect sense, what if I told you that this art recently sold for $14 million? Does that change how you feel? And if so, how?
Okay. A fool is born every day. I'll make some outraged, overpriced. I need a different job.
There it
Appalled.
is.
Simplicity's the message. I'm definitely in the wrong business.
Exactly. These are the reactions that I was kind of hoping for. So what's worth pointing out about this particular art in this art form, it's minimalist, as people can probably easily tell, but the art itself is not the product. So in a lot of cases where you're painting lilies of the field or a Mona Lisa, like the brush strokes and the patterns and the contrast and the image itself, the art itself is what the artist was intending you to respond to. In the case of those minimalist things, minimalist art, especially the white series that you'll see a bunch of artists that had done back in the 40s, 50s, their intent was your reaction. So the specific layout, the number of panels, the type of white, the size, the structure, all the art that they designed, their reaction of you was what their intent was. So if you look at this and you get angry because it's so simple, I could do that, or a kid could do that, or that's boring, or it's tranquil and calm, all those are valid art reactions that the artist was hoping that you would have. And it's more about you than it is about the art. What is your reaction? Like, why would this make you mad, or why would this calm you down? And that's something that you have to question yourself with it. So the art itself, although is extremely minimalistic and plain, can give you a wide range of emotions from tranquil to hostile, especially when you start hearing that this is considered art and people can make millions of dollars off of it. Now, if I contrast that with something like this, how does this make you guys feel? Once again, open for comments here if you want to read them out for me.
cool?
Right.
Okay.
It makes you feel cool.
Warm,
or it's cool.
soothe, cozy, warm and relaxed, toasty, winter, warm and peaceful, peaceful, relaxed, engaged.
Yeah. See, nice. It's a thing. The Yule log has been around for decades. I remember as a kid watching this on like closed local access TV on Christmas. They would turn it on and just leave it running 24 hours a day, and now you can watch it online all you want. But as a hydrologist, I have slowly transitioned into doing wildfire work. Over the last 3 years in particular, I became a red-carded burned area emergency response hydrologist and public information officer, so I spent a lot of times out in wildfires the last couple of years. The smell, the sound, the crackle of fire has much different reaction to me. It smells like destruction. I get like, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. So it brings a different reaction than some people, and if you work with other firefighters, they might feel the same way. A campfire does not smell the same to somebody who's been a wildland firefighter as it does to your average recreational weekend camper. So similar to the white painting that can have a variety of reactions based off of calm and tranquil to angry and hostile, something like this, which in some views is like fire is destruction and death, and fire and brimstone, hell, devils, but it's also tranquil and Christmas and warm and family. So what image and what visual you use, what art form, what presence you have can vary depending on who you're talking to, what that audience is, their expectations, their feelings, and it's up to you as the presenter to know and consider this when you go into developing a talk. So with that said, I'm going to give a little background on how you can develop a really good talk and how you adjust it for different audiences. So all communication products, going back big picture before cycling back down to presentations in particular, all products, all communication needs, from dialogue back and forth with a friend to social media, presentations, websites, etc., reports, have 5 considerations. So if you're taking notes from this presentation as a workshop idea to help improve your performance, here are the 5 things you need to know. You got to consider your audience, your purpose, your message, your action, and your evaluation. So when I'm talking audience is a very broad term, but it will define everything that you want to do moving forward with a presentation. Let's focus back on that. So who are you talking to? Are you talking to your peers at a conference that you normally go to? Are you talking to a local grade school as a STEM night? Are you going to the neighborhood association? Are you presenting at a webinar? What is the audience that you are presenting to will dictate what goes into a presentation, how you present that presentation, and how you expect your audience to respond to that presentation. Next, purpose. Why are you doing it? Like, what makes you the person that should be providing this service, providing this presentation? Why are you giving it? Is it for your own reasons? Are you trying to raise your public profile? Are you trying to raise money? Are you trying to sell a book? Are you trying to get more likes, shares, and subscribes if you're doing a video? What is it that's driving you specifically to produce a product? In this case, what's giving you the incentive? Why are you going out to present? And you need to understand your intentions so that you can be more successful with your presentation when it comes to evaluating it. Next, what is the message? Now, this is where I run into a lot of conflict with my scientific colleagues, that people have a hard time being concise when it comes to scientific materials, especially when you're presenting different types of audiences. A general rule that I like to put out is consequence will usually outweigh precision in most audiences. When you're talking to peers, that's the one exception where you want to be as precise as possible, but in other audiences, you want to focus more on the consequence of what's going on. Another way to look at this is, I see a lot of presentations where a scientist will spend 95% of the time talking about the 5% error, rather than talking 95% of the time about that 95% certainty in what they're presenting. And the way I look at it is, if you're not confident enough to write, publish, and present on something, you probably shouldn't be presenting it. It's pretty simple that way. So with the message, when you're trying to curtail what you want your audience to know, you want to design that material that you're presenting in a very concise and digestible way. And usually what I refer to is like you want to give just one message. And think of it this way. So if I present here now, and then I run into one of you guys in the future in 3 months, I want to be able to have you walk up and say, oh, I love that talk that you gave on that thesis statement. So when you're presenting, you want to make sure that everybody knows what the hell you're trying to talk about so that it makes sense for them and they can actually walk away. And my perspective is a little different, it seems, than a lot of other folks that have come on in the community with, because of, I don't know, maybe the upbringing where I'm the youngest of 3 boys, where I was always competitive. And for me, I like to try winning. I want things to be memorable. So when I go into a conference and there's 7 or 5 or 4 speakers, I want to make sure my presentation stands out and people can remember it. And a way to make that happen is to have a clear message, a clear, content purpose, so that people know what happened, so they can come out and remember it. Another consideration that you have when you're designing a presentation is that you want to have an intended reaction. So this is what they call the call to arms from your audience. So when you go in, you just shouldn't be in there just dumping information. You should be providing insights, but you should also expect the audience to get something, because it's not about you, it's about them. So what can they do in response to this? And this, if you think, once again, with YouTube shows, the like, share, and subscribe. You want people to actually do something. So what is the intended reaction of your presentation? Do you want them to give you money? Do you want them to ask you to present again? Do you want them to cooperate on a future project with you? Do you want them to go home and share what they learned today with their family at the dinner table? You should have something like this designed within your presentation so that the audience feels engaged, so that they'll know what to do next, besides forget about what you talked about and continue on with their day. That is not successful, which reminds me and brings the last point of evaluating your success. It's one thing to just put something out there and expect or hope someone will come across it. It's another one to actually put something out there with the marketing and the efforts behind it to make sure that it has value, provides a service, and actually has legs to go forward with that. So how do you know if you're successful with that? You need to evaluate what you do. You need to set metrics for your success. So if we're thinking specifically for a presentation, what does that mean? Well, it means, did I get enough people to ask me questions after? Was I able to get invited to another presentation after? Was I able to set up and meet people and develop project after having that interaction? And then set that for, like, well, I'd love to at least have 3 questions. I'd like to have at least 1 opportunity to help somebody else with another presentation. So whatever that evaluation metric is, that should be set up for you personally so that you feel that you've achieved what you wanted to do. And if you don't achieve that, that means you need to make adjustments moving forward. Now, focusing back onto the purpose of this, like the art of science communication and how to design things specifically for different audiences, there are more than 3, but if I'm going to try forming silos of intended people that you are going to try talking to and how to reach them differently, in simplest terms, at least consider 3 different audiences when you're trying to present your science information. So, presenting to your peers, this is, once again, the thing that everybody's very familiar with, what everybody does, so I'm not going to harp on that too much, but the other considerations are policymakers and peers, or sorry, policymakers and the public. So the public is basically the uninformed, unengaged people that you're trying to reach from scratch. And the best way to reach them, strong visuals, explain the consequences, the so what, why does it matter to me, and then provide a little bit of data. If you're speaking to the public and you have equations and box plots in your presentation, chances are you're not going to be as successful. However, that does make a little bit more sense when you deal with the policymakers. Policymakers in my world here are people that basically provide funding, support, opportunities. These are the grants, the administrators, the cooperators, the people that allow you to do the science that you do and help make it possible. So for them, the most important is the consequences, because they usually have to do something in response to what you discovered in your research. So why does it matter to them and what can they do about it? That's where you provide them a service. You also need to provide them enough justification in the data that the consequences are valid and real and need to be worked for. It also helps to have things be pretty, because generally they're not overly interested in what your science is. They're trying to do their job. But if you can give them something pretty, something shiny, it's going to go a lot further to help them understand the consequence and validate the data that you're providing it. And then peers, they already engaged, they know what you're doing. They're there because they're trying to grow and expand their story based off of what you've got. So you just want to give them the information. You give them the data that they can help facilitate their understanding so that they can continue the message. I mean, we're still not trying to figure out how electricity works because we figured that out. We're now moving on to other things like putting new landers on the blue moon on the moon. So we're moving forward based off of the information we have on the backs of giants moving forward. So when you talk to peers, that's where your focus is, but they also like something pretty if possible because that helps keep them engaged. Okay, in comparisons, looking at 3 when we're talking visuals, how do we set this up? What's the art, so to speak? Public's very important to them, peers not as much. Policymakers, you know, you want a good amount of material that they can feast their eyes on, not just listen to you ramble about your research. So here's an image. So if I'm just talking plumb visuals and I want to give a presentation talking about water quality, here's a coworker of mine. We're studying water quality at Zollner Creek as part of the USGS. I've done work over the last almost 20 years now with our National Water Quality Assessment Program, or NAQA, and each year we go out and do a trend study looking at the water quality of certain rivers, benchmark rivers across the country. In Oregon, one river in particular is Zollner Creek. Now, with this, I don't need to show you too much data or too much information. I can go in and say that Zollner Creek is one of the most polluted streams in the United States, and it's one of the benchmark ones as the worst streams that we go in order to see how bad things can get. Now, as you notice, this individual is standing waist deep in duckweed, and every year we go in and try assessing the algae, the fish, the habitat, and then the macroinvertebrates or bugs within the stream. And it's really hard to find anything in there because it's an agricultural stream that has excessive runoff and pollution related to fertilizers and nutrients. Things vegetatively grow pretty good here, but things that need to breathe tend to not. It also has a kind of Alice in Restaurant feel to it because it is a dump site. So every time we've gone to this river, we found a variety of pretty disgusting things that have been thrown off the bridge as trucks and cars drive by, and from things from refrigerators to bags of diapers to deer carcasses from during hunting season. We've been shot at or shot near in this area. So it is a pretty terrible stream to do water quality work, except if you're interested in really bad water quality. But of course, as hydrologists, we love our job, so we got a big smile. So in this case, visual being, if you look, we can explain a story, we can tell details about what goes on without having to show too much information, but with being able to represent our information visually. Plus, you look for striking, where it's good color contrast. We all like faces and smiles. It makes it feel more personal. And there's just enough information here to realize that there's research going on. So as a visual, this would be a strong visual that I would use to help tell a story about poor water quality without having to rely strictly on box plots, bar graphs, and data heavy information. Now moving on from visuals to consequences, the public, they like to know why it matters to them. This is why the person at the grocery counter is checking you out. Why should she care? Why the neighbor should care? The grandmother, the 12-year-old. You've probably all heard the different anecdotes of how to make things relevant to the public. Making things matter is the best way to explain that. Peers generally are supportive. They're doing it for the same reasons you are, so you don't necessarily need to explain yourself as much for them. But policymakers, it's extremely important to emphasize what's going on, why it matters, what can be done about it, what's the consequences of the research you're doing. I alluded to earlier that I do a lot of fire work over the last couple of years, and part of that is studying debris flows and landslides post-wildfire. Now, if I were to walk out to a site here where someone's entire livelihood was destroyed, there was a house there in the background you can't see that's all concrete foundation, the entire building has been burned up. You can see the car in front with a colleague of mine walking behind in the yellows. I can't just walk up and say, hey, I'm super excited about coming out here and assessing the water quality and assessing the debris flow hazards and the flooding in this area without realizing that there was consequences here. There was lost livelihoods. There was 52 homes that were burned in here, property damage in the millions, hundreds of thousands of acres of area burned. It was a very large and damaging fire. Now that's important when I'm talking to different audiences and how I engage in that I can't walk in immediately talking about my excitement of my research without at least addressing and understanding the consequences as a whole, holistically, of how my research relates to what people care about. So here they care about loss of property, they care about the economics, they care about how their future and how to rebuild and going forward. So you want to make sure you at least pay tribute to that before you start talking about your research. And that's kind of an example of what I mean with, you know, understanding the consequences of not only what your research does, but how your research wraps into the larger picture at hand. Lastly, there's data. Public doesn't care. As much as you'd like to think that they care about it as much as you do, they don't. And I can prove that to you. But I'm going to do it another time. But the idea is that if you talk about your research strictly from the analytical point of view, eyes will glaze over and people will not care. Peers, they may get excited about it. Policymakers, once again, they need to understand it to make decisions. So how do you make that information that you have collected and analyzed and processed, how do you make that relevant and interesting? Short answer is you try simplifying to that similar thing of one message, like simplify your material so that it makes sense to what you're trying to explain with that visual. Here's a very simple one that I would use. If I were studying stream temperatures because I was worried about a fish population, say salmon in coastal Oregon, and I knew that there are certain thresholds or criterion that fish need in order to thrive for a cold water environment, and I'm monitoring temperature the entire time for like a 3-year period, and I know that stream temperatures go above that criterion. If I want to help explain, you know, what's going on, the river's too hot. How do I know? Here's how I know. What is it, you know, can I justify this or show it to you? Yes. In these areas below, we're perfectly fine. In the areas above, we're too hot. And yes, there's concern of editorializing and sensationalizing, but depending on your audience, you sometimes have to make things a little bit more sexy than you feel comfortable doing, and that is okay. Now, in the last 15 or so minutes here, to help kind of drive home the message of understanding your different audiences and how to develop materials for them specifically, I have 3 examples for you, because why not? Okay, so first, if I were to give a presentation in 5 minutes or less about a project that I have worked on in the past and now I'm presenting to my peers, it may sound something very similar to this, which should sound very familiar to most of you. Okay, I have my video on. I'm getting myself into scene. Okay, hi, I'm Steve Sobieszczyk. I'm a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a study that I've recently done looking at water quality in the Wilson and Trask rivers here in Oregon. Now, to give you a little perspective of what I'll be talking to you about today and kind of get it all in context for you. So the reason we're looking at this is we're trying to do a long-term monitoring at these 2 particular rivers in coastal Oregon because we're trying to evaluate what their current stream temperatures and oxygen conditions are, because they are what's considered impaired streams for a certain endangered fish, but basically salmon in the coastal Oregon. And the stream reaches within the Wilson and Trask that we're interested in have had histories of being too warm, as well as not having enough oxygen. And there's also some sediment related issues to that, but we're not going to focus on that today. But we're trying to understand what's going on in the environment, put it in context, and then try to understand going forward what implications this may have for managing the fish population, as well as managing how the water quality can be adjusted and potentially improved. Background for those unfamiliar with the Wilson and Trask area, here in the Pacific Northwest, it's in Northwest Oregon. It's basically 2 large bays south of the Columbia River between Washington and Oregon, and the Wilson and Trask flow into the Tillamook Bay is the estuary that they work. Both streams are considered salmon-bearing streams, and both have been listed by the Oregon Department of Water Quality as being water quality impaired segments. Now, with this particular research, what kind of stands out is trying to figure out how to monitor streams in certain environments, take a certain amount of mindset, a certain amount of work and evaluation. So what we were most considering, or what we were most concerned with, was looking at how much air was in the stream, so dissolved oxygen, as well as what the temperatures, and then potentially how much sediment is going down that may be filling in estuary and dealing with salmon beds and things like that. So when we set out our monitors, we had the 2 sites. both of them looking at dissolved oxygen, specific conductance, turbidity, and water temperature. We had it set up for a 3-year period. Both locations do have stream flow information that, in the case of the Wilson, dates back to the early century in the 1915 area, but the Trask River is much newer, basically dates back to 1996 with stream flow information. While we're out doing the study, one of the more interesting aspects that kind of stands out, which might be relevant to you guys as you've developed projects, that took a lot of creativity to figure out how to monitor these two streams successfully, because the Coast Range in Oregon is a heavily forested environment, and that particular environment provides certain limitations to assessing stream water quality. In this particular case, when we had our instrument in place, we were noticing that we're having a lot of biofouling issues where algae and film were forming on our optical sensors. We also had a lot of leaf litter that was making its way downstream, and it was actually clogging up our installations. So we had to figure out ways to kind of combat issues that we were doing with our data collection. So one of my colleagues was very ingenious and decided, hey, let's see if we can figure out a way to install pumps in order to wash off and clear off the optical sensors and help keep materials from accumulating on the sensor or on the instrument itself. So we had cages, we had pumps and things installed. Here's a lab exercise where proof of concept to see if we're able to do it. Turns out it seemed to be a good idea. So we then installed the pump onto the probe out in the field, ran it on a sensor. So it basically would release the jet of water, I believe 2 minutes prior to each of the readings in order to help keep the sensor clear. And lo and behold, it gave us very, very, very good readings. So we're very proud of that. If you guys have any questions about how to do that, let me know after, and I can definitely walk you through the process. So what did we learn for our study? Well, for both of the streams, if we're concerned about them being temperature impaired, it looks like they were. So each fall, looking at the letters here, those are the months from January through December. Starting in June and July, in both streams, temperatures began to rise above what was deemed a safe criterion of water temperature for cold water species salmon. And in this case, it would continue on from June, July, August into September, and sometimes beyond. Looking at the oxygen areas, or dissolved oxygen for the two streams, the dark blue Wilson River and the light blue in the Trask. The Trask was generally okay, although it did dip low. As you might have noticed, we did pull it out in the winter because high flows, plenty of water, plenty of air in the stream. It wasn't as much of an issue as the low and slow temperatures in the summer can cause a lot of oxygen to decrease. So here, looking at the Wilson, however, we noticed that it did drop precariously low to what would be considered unsafe conditions of 8 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen. So although it stayed above it in 2013, 2012, and 2014, the Wilson kind of dipped below briefly for a couple hours to a couple days in each of those instances, although the Trask dipped low, maintained above what would deem problematic. So what do we learn from this? Well, water temperature exceeds the threshold in each of the river for the summer and the fall. The oxygen supply meets the criterion technically, but does begin to dip precariously low each summer and could be of emerging concern. And then when you're trying to do good science, sometimes creativity does help. So we're very proud of figuring out how we did what we did on this one. So what's next moving forward? Well, we'll continue doing streamflow monitoring at the Wilson and Trask rivers. There is a new monitor put out on the Tillamook River, which is another tributary into the Tillamook Bay. There are some studies from Oregon State University and elsewhere that are looking at monitoring forest practices upstream of these rivers to see how that might improve or change the conditions within the stream. And there's also recent work going in the lower part near the estuary where the Wilson and Trask rivers meet, called the Southern Flow Corridor, where they're actually restoring the environment to control flooding and improve conditions there at the mouth. There's plenty of other people involved from the state and the county and private industries as well. If you want to read what we've discovered, the report has been published and you can see and access it here. And if you have any questions, I am here to blah, 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 and scene, we're done. So for most of you, that probably sounded just like every other presentation you've ever seen at a conference or a brown bag or anything else. And that's intentional because it aligns with the expectations of your audience. I tried to simplify some of the images and illustrations to help punch forward with the points, the messages I was trying to emphasize, But in general, the tone, the mannerisms, the material, the language, all that is in alignment with what my audience, in this case, other hydrologists or engineers, would be familiar with. Next up, back into scene. Okay, policymakers. Hi, I'm Steve Sobey. I am a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and today I was invited to kind of talk to you guys a little bit more about what's going on with our impaired coastal streams here in Oregon. For those of you who are not familiar with the streams I'm talking about, here in Oregon on the coast in the Northwest, we're looking at two tributaries that are flowing into Tillamook Bay. We're looking at the Wilson and Trask rivers. Both of these are salmon-bearing streams, and both of them have in fact been listed as being water quality impaired. And this could be problematic because, as most of you in this room probably are aware, salmon are an endangered species, or at least threatened in some cases. And here they also serve as a significant source of local revenue, recreation. It's a big part of the community, especially in coastal Oregon with fisheries. So people care about their fish. So we want to make sure that the environment is most suitable or as beneficial as possible to these species. Now, when I'm talking about impaired streams, for those who aren't overly familiar with it, let me explain a little bit more about that. So water quality impaired standards are established by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, looking at different characteristics. And it could be everything from E. coli to oxygen, temperature, algae. There's a bunch of stuff that they look and list. For these two streams, for the Wilson and Trask, we're focusing primarily on two. We're looking at temperature and dissolved oxygen. Now, when we're looking at temperature, what we're actually considering is a 7-day average maximum. And we're looking at both the summer seasonal as well as the yearly kind of criteria threshold of what the cool water streams, as they're listed, require for, or the cold water streams require for these type of fish. And in the case of both rivers that we're interested in, the summer temperature is 16 degrees C. Anything higher than that will begin to kind of stress and potentially threaten the fish. And then the rest of the year, 13 degrees C is what we're interested in. And you know, what do I mean by stress? Well, the way I look at it this way is like, it's really fun for us humans to like sit in a hot tub for 15 minutes. It's all fun and sexy and we like it. But could you imagine spending 3 or 4 months stuck in that hot tub, unable to get out? Your motivations, your drives, your physical body are going to have troubles, and you're going to begin to feel that stress. Well, that's what's essentially happening to these fish. Another issue we're potentially concerned about is looking at how much oxygen fish breathe air. So how much air is actually in the water? Well, the threshold set for these streams is actually 8 milligrams per liter, and that basically means 8 milligrams of air per liter of water, and that basically is how much air they need to breathe before they begin to kind of feel that pressure, the elephant on the chest or suffocating. You don't want these, basically fish need a certain amount to breathe, just like we do. Now, what are we seeing in these streams? Well, stream temperatures, they're getting a little bit too hot, or they remain too hot. So over the 3 years that we're looking at this, we've noticed that in both the Wilson and Trask, each summer going to each fall, the temperature did exceed what was considered an appropriate or safe criterion for the fish. Similar, but not quite, the amount of oxygen necessary. So in the summer is when rivers are low and slow, they get hotter, the amount of air that's available is reduced. In the winter, it's more water, more movement, more air can kind of get trapped in, or is contained in the streams themselves. So we didn't really worry about the winter conditions. We were more worried about low oxygen conditions in summer. So we actually only deploy during summer, which helped save a little bit of money as well. But we noticed that in the Wilson River in particular, it began to dip precariously close to what was of concern for, what's that standard for amount of air that these fish would actually need. So what does that all mean? Well, the streams are too hot in the summer. The oxygen is dipping potentially too low and may continue to dip lower and lower in the future if things aren't done. The fish are remaining threatened in the area. And if we're going to try to make a difference in this, we got to make sure to engage with the community more and get them involved, because if this is their livelihood, they need to actually understand the consequences of what's going on and understand that if things get too bad, there's going to be no fish, which is going to have longer term effects on them. So it's important for us to understand the current conditions, kind of figure out how things are trending in the future, and then if there's something we can do about it, and then make sure everybody's involved and aware and engaged in this process to help make a difference with it. Now, with that all said, anybody have any questions? Blah, 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 and scene. Now, here we go, last 5 minutes. Let's talk about how we would talk to the public. Okay, get myself ready. Yep, I'm dancing. And hi, I'm Steve. I'm a scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and today I'm here to talk to you about the health of our coastal streams here in Oregon. Oh no, don't freeze. Okay, now the two streams that I'm focusing on here, if you're not familiar with the state of Oregon, is I'm looking at the Tillamook Bay, which is along the Pacific coast in the northwest corner of Oregon. Now, the Tillamook Bay is a large estuary. Navigation, there's a lot of fishing that goes on in there. It's a big driver in the economy. The two streams that feed it that I'm most interested in, the ones we've done a recent research, we're looking at the Trask and the Wilson River. Now, these are two tributaries to the Tillamook Bay, and both the Wilson and Trask rivers are great salmon fishing spots. So those fly fishermen out there, if they've never been to the Oregon coast, woo, big treat for you. You should really come out and explore it because you will find some beautiful fish out here. But with that being said, the streams that they live in, things might be getting a little bit worse for them. And we're trying to figure out if that's true and to what level, and is this going to be something that we're going to have to be concerned about going ahead in the future. Now, what do we mean? What's concerning? Well, fish like things cool, crisp, and fast. It's turning out, as we've been monitoring the streams here in the two rivers, that generally fish, I'm going to kind of broad base here, they like temperatures that are about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. They like coolish streams, too cold for us. We're seeing summer temperatures rise well above that into the 70s. Now, that may be fun for us to go swimming, you know, in the ocean or in the river. That's a nice warm water on a nice sunny day. But the fish have to live in these waters. And the way I think of it is like, it's so fun to go hang out in the hot tub and be crazy and sexy and just enjoy life. But could you imagine being stuck in a sauna or stuck in a hot tub for months? It's like, oh yeah, you can have food, but are you really going to be hungry? It's like, yeah, you can go to the bathroom, but you're going to be kind of sitting there just hot and sweaty and feeling miserable the entire time. Well, this is kind of what's happening to the fish. They're beginning to get essentially stressed by the potential conditions in the streams. And this could be problematic for both their reproduction going forward and kind of what their populations currently and moving into the future. Another issue that we're starting to see is fish need air to breathe. And by monitoring how much air is in the water, we've discovered that in the times of the year, basically summer where conditions are low and slow, there may not be enough air, or they're starting to see periods where there's not enough air in the stream. And that, once again, could further threaten and further stress out the fish. It's bad enough to be hot and sweaty and miserable, but then to be hot, sweaty, and miserable and not able to breathe, you can imagine some of the problems that, you know, may be encountered with these fish. So as we're moving forward, we're beginning to see that although, for example, in the blue line here, the Trask, the light blue, that still stays above the area we want to see, with the amount of air we want to see. The Wilson, the dark blue, is actually starting to dip down, and we're seeing that happen. And if this is going to be a trend going forward, it potentially might be getting worse. So we're not expecting it to get much better. So what does this mean? Too hot and not enough air is bad for the fish. And it's our jobs to work with, you know, people in the area to help make this as better as possible by providing the accurate information so those who make the decisions can make better decisions about how to help alleviate the stress, help fix the situation. So what's next? Well, we need to keep studying, we need to respond, and hopefully we can make a difference, because in the case of this local community, you know, fish drive the economy, fish drive the activities, the fun, the engagement that you guys have in the world around you. It's part of what is appreciated in the coastal Oregon community. So I can tell you as much as you want information-wise, but I can't make the difference. I'm going back to my desk at Portland, and I can, you know, type on my computer, and I can forget about what happens in the Wilson and Trask. You guys who live here, this is your community. So if you care about it as much as I imagine you do, here's your chance to start thinking and working with local groups to try making a difference if you really want to keep your fish populations thriving, and that way helping keeping your community thriving as well. So with that all said, once again, I'm Steve Sobieszczyk, or Steve Sobi. I am a scientist, and I'm more than happy to explain a little bit more about the research that went into the study I talked about and consequences and all that. Feel free to reach out to me. You can email me or you can give me a call and I'll talk to you more about that. But with that said, do you have any questions? And scene.
Steve,
Yes, sir.
I've got some for you. I've been collecting them.
Okay,
so
go for it.
let me. This one actually goes back relatively early in your talk, so I'm not sure you'll recall it. But the questioner asked, "Can Stephen please repeat what he said about confidence outweighing the message?" I'm not sure I have that wording correct.
Okay, so a rule of thumb I give is consequence outweighs precision. And that plays out primarily when talking to the public for sure. And then when talking to policymakers, potentially, it is not a great concern when talking to peers, because peers will call you out. And if I can use my morning example here of, I can talk to you about the hyporheic exchange between surface water in the phreatic zone and unconfined aquifer and Deschutes, but I'd rather talk about water seeping into the ground. Another hydrologist may say, well, when you're talking about the hyporheic exchange, you're not talking about just water gravitationally sinking down. You're actually talking about interflow as well as capillary action, where water can actually go up and down. It's not one directional. I understand all that, but that's the precision that just is bullshit to when you're talking to an average person. 90% of the water is going down, so I'm going to focus on the water that's going down. It's the same thing when talking about turbidity in my world, where I talk about dirty water. Other hydrologists and water quality get offended sometimes that there's more that causes water to be turbid than just water. It's an optical property of, light being absorbed and scattered versus except whatever. But when you're looking at a river and it's brown, the reason it's brown is mostly because of dirt sediment in it. So it's just about understanding who your audience is, what they understand, and then since you're the smart one, theoretically, because you're the one with all the education, you should be able to change how you talk about it. And it's not dumbing it down. I mean, that's sometimes people get offended by hearing that. It's like, I'm not saying the wah-wah goes boom boom. I'm basically saying water seeps. I mean, those are real grammar, literature words that you can use that describe something similar without getting into the precision of what actually is happening. Don't overkill. So I'll stop there.
So Steve, were you gonna do a wrap up on? Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going.
Okay. So just to finish up the talk here in the last couple seconds. So if you're comparing let's see if I can close my little window. Your 3 different versions. So you have your audience, purpose, message, reaction, evaluation on the one side, talk 1, 2, and 3, policymaker, peer. So the purpose is going to vary depending on your audience. So, for a peer, you're just trying to inform them. That's okay. It could be the and, you're just listing more information, providing them resources, something that they can help understand, or that's something that they understand, help move their story forward. When you're working with a policymaker, you're going to kind of change a little bit, and you're going to go more to the education realm. And for those who don't know the difference between educate and inform, it's basically participation. So you can inform, and then you make them do something as well. So you try to engage a policymaker audience and have them actually participate with the information that you're providing so that they can learn it. And then the last one is engaging with the public, where you're never going to change anybody's mind in 15, 30, or 45 minutes about whatever your science topic is. Your job is to just get them interested, aware of what's going on. So it's about trying to inspire or trying to engage, where it's like that's the opposite spectrum of inform, educate, involve. You want them involved. You want their hands. That's why we always talk about getting kids playing in the sand pit or getting their hands involved in it. You want them doing it more than you talking about it. Message, impaired streams, sad fish, because charismatic animals are more important than a guy sticking a stick in the water. Reaction, you want for your peers, they're going to try duplicating, replicating, advancing the research that you've done or that they're doing. The policymakers are going to help manage, fund, continue the research. And then you want the public to kind of understand what's going on. And then the evaluation part, how am I being successful? Well, if you give a presentation to a peer audience and they come to you and start asking questions about, hey, let's cooperate on this, or how did you address this? Then you understand that you've reached them in a way that they can understand and that it's been successful for you, that you're helping them advance the story by facilitating discussion. Policymaker, you want to provoke response. The reason you're doing the research for a cooperator is, in this case, so that they'll do something with that information. You don't want them just to like, oh, learn and then stop and then never do anything about it. So if you're successful, they're going to want to do something about it. The community's going to want to get involved and do something. So, and the same thing with public, you just want to invoke that curiosity of, okay, so this is a thing. Now I know if I want to learn more, they can look it up. You'd be surprised that this disconnect that scientists think that they need to provide all the information. You just need to provide a spark, and people, if they're curious, will more than happily look up and discover more on their own. Now, with that said, I would kind of wrap up with all that in mind of the intention and your purpose and message and all that I've covered. If you look at this again, does this kind of inspire a different reaction to you, or do you still feel that this is boring, or do you still feel that this makes you mad, knowing that there was intent behind the way the art, that the development of this product, there was insight that the artist went into doing it. It wasn't just, hey, I'm bored, I'm gonna throw 3 panels up and be done with it. That it took effort on their part to try doing something that they knew would have a response, and they knew what those responses would be, or potentially could be, that there's intent behind whether they're successful, they were able to sell it and be successful artists and so forth. So with that, I will shut up and let the last 10 minutes here be open for questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got some for you. Actually, Stephen.
Yes, sir. Fine. I hear Stephen, I'm like, oh, that's formal.
Oh, okay. Where do you get your inspirations for your visuals, or do you have a resource that you could recommend for the creation of great visuals?
Well, it takes practice is my thing. I actually draw and doodle and do all that stuff, but be aware of resources that are available. People tend to think that they can only use what's in their report, and they do the clip, copy, and then dump into the presentation. That is bad form when it comes to giving an actual talk. There are simple online resources, like there's some there for Pexels or Pixelbee, which are free public domain use images. As you've all probably heard thousands of times, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You can get more run out of a single picture than you can out of just a table that you pull off of a report. And once again, it all depends on audience, because you don't want to subvert expectations too much, because then it becomes annoying for some people.
Okay, this one's a good one. How do you avoid dumbing down to the point where you're talking down to a public audience? Are there signs to watch for as you're speaking?
Well, it's about tone and mannerisms more than language. Okay. So when I'm saying talking down, I immediately go to a condescending asshole who's like, oh, well, you don't understand, so I'm going to talk to you like that. No, the reason people are successful presenters and the reason people are successful communicators in general is because essentially you're likable. And if you're able to kind of converse and make the conversation, any communication is both listening and talking. So you talk with the person about what it is that they're trying to understand from the head.
Okay.
I don't know, being likable, that's a pretty big bar, Michael.
Well, for me it is.
Yeah. It's about confidence and mannerisms, and art is good, but I mean, my goal is to, I've actually done it once, is I have a basically hour-long presentation, 45 with 15-minute questions with 4 slides, and I can talk for 45 minutes with just those 4 visuals without relying on AV as a crutch. But that takes practice. I've been working on for 10 years.
Okay.
Like any other skill, knowing what to put in, you have to think about it. It's not just I'm putting my presentation together while on the plane to the conference, and then I'm sitting out in front of it, in front of the room, making adjustments 5 minutes before the talk. Respect the process, I guess is the way to talk about it, where if you're trying to provide a service and you want people to appreciate it, respect them, and they'll see that and they'll respond to that.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions for making presentations for mixed audiences that perhaps have some of your peers and policymakers and the public all in one spot? Is that?
Yeah, I'll say go down the dumb it down one. So you're never going to, I'm not saying never overwhelm. You're never going to overwhelm somebody who knows as much or more than you. They're always going to like feeling smart. So there's a reason why, even as a an educated hydrologist, geologist, like I watch Discovery Channel shows and I still entertained. I may call out some of the BS that like, oh, that's not true, or that's an exaggeration, but I'm still entertained by it. So when you're doing a mixed audience, I'm not saying go to the lowest denominator, but set it up so that the majority of the people can understand and appreciate it. And then the ones who know more, subconsciously, they'll just feel better about themselves because like, I already know that. And don't worry about it as much.
Okay.
The mixed audiences, there's very few cases where you're an even split of people. Generally, it's going to be like a public lecture, which you're designing for the public, and there'll be a few professionals kind of linked in or that have, joined it just to participate.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see now. Oh, here's one. What if your policymakers, invite farmers who might believe that their livelihood is way more important than a couple of salmon? How do you deal with that?
Well, you listen. You respect differences of opinions. And this is going to be my social soapbox here. Is it seems like we're in a world now where it's impossible to disagree. Guess what? You can disagree, and you can have that conversation and still be respectful about it.
Okay.
And in this case, if their livelihood is more important than fish, that is a completely valid truth for them and for you to consider. It then just becomes, what can we do to make this most beneficial for everyone? I'm more of the making it better for the most than deciding to make the silent minority or the vocal minority the happiest. I'd rather make the majority happy.
Okay. Let's
see.
See.
You're not going to beat everybody, or you're not going to convince everybody.
Okay. So when you're talking to the public, should you tell them what they can do to make a difference to improve water quality, or whatever you're talking about?
So this one is going to be I'm going to jump back on the fence for policy-wise for me for USGS. We're a non-regulatory agency and we're not allowed to technically make recommendations or some of that type of stuff. But when you're talking face-to-face people, it's okay to offer the information and things that are available. Like it's not. I'm trying to think of a specific example here, but there are many solutions available, and it's okay to provide people with information on those resources without necessarily telling them that you need to do this. Okay,
sounds good. Here's one person. It's actually more of a comment than a question, but the person indicates that they would like to request that we all stop thinking about quote unquote dumbing it down, as this in itself is disrespectful to people we're trying to communicate with. I'm not sure you said that, Steve. You said. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I made an allusion to that. Some people get worked up over saying the words "dumb it down," and I'm indifferent to it. I understand this context, and I agree with the sentiment behind the necessity to make things understandable, because people tend to forget that the reason they're at where they're at is because they've gone through multiple years of higher education in their specific field, and they've kind of forgotten what it was like their freshman year in college before they took their first chemistry class. The majority of people have not done that. So you need to kind of remember, remember back to what it was like to not have that information, but also not fall victim to the biggest issue in science communication, which I haven't mentioned yet, is people tend to follow the deficit model, which is another term, where everyone will be on page with me if I give them all the information possible, and that doesn't work. You're never going to convince somebody of something by just overwhelming them with more and more data and information. You can get into all the different realms of touchy subjects, from GMOs, climate change, vaccines, yada, yada. What it comes out to is people listen to the people they trust and that they like. So when it comes especially to public, and once again, separating the audiences, because peers keep doing what you normally do, but policymakers in public, I mean, it is seriously about making relationships. It's about not trying to end the conversation after one interaction. It's about building, talking, following up, making the effort, and then just becomes, are you willing to make the commitment to, I say, be better at your job, but to be better at trying to get that information, and to get better at trying to appreciate and understand, and not just shutting someone out because they disagree with you.
So,
Okay.
Michael,
Go ahead.
we've hit the 11 o'clock hour. So what we probably should do, and Steve, are you able to stick around for a few more minutes?
Yes.
Great. Maybe we should go ahead and do our wrap up so that people that need to leave right now can do that. And then maybe we can stay online for a few minutes longer for a couple of last comments.
Well, the wrap up I had was I was going to thank Steve for a wonderful presentation, and thank all the people who are still on. Actually, we've got over 80 people still online, so I wanted to thank them for participating. So that's all I was going to say. If Steve can, I've got a few more questions coming in, so I can just go ahead and feed those to Steve and see what he says.
That sounds great. So thank you, everybody. If you need to hop off, we completely understand. And those of you who'd like to stick around a little bit longer, we'd love to keep talking.
Actually, again, Stephen, this is not a question, but it's a comment from one of your government colleagues, I believe. But from a FEMA publication on communication, it says, plain speaking is not dumbing it down, but respecting your readers or audience's time. So anyway,
it's not, once again, it's whether you're bothered by the words dumbing it down. I tend not to get worked up over that. It's about using language that is real speak. And the example I gave, it's like when I say water seeping into the ground, those are real words. I'm not saying the boom boom wah wah kind of, that's when it,
it's
not.
Okay, let's see. And you touched on this right before Lisa asked, gave people permission to go off if they wanted to, but you were talking about, trust is important if you're trying to convince someone of something, because we had a question, or more or less a statement, about trying to change a climate change denier's mind when their system, or when their belief system, doesn't really believe that you as a scientist is truthful. So how do you deal with something like that? I think that's an issue that a lot of us have, not just with respect to climate change, but I'm sure you've kind of run into that, where you're explaining something about water quality and someone says, well, I don't believe those instruments, or that's just all you say so.
This is what, once again, it's about trust, and I don't say likability, but it's about being able to have a disagreement until you're able to work through the process. It's almost a courtship in that regards, where there's this belief incorrectly that if I just provide all this information, you're going to be right, or you're going to agree with me, and if you don't agree with me, you're stupid. And nobody's stupid. Just, you have to be respectful to others' beliefs, and then understand that they got there based off of their understanding, their resources, their upbringing, background, history, and then you basically can either find creative ways of explaining it, whether it be like specific examples that may or may not work, like talking evolution. So people don't believe because of biblical upbringing, whatever. And you can go into explaining genetics, that in the last 16,000 years, we're able to take a dingo and a wolf and make a Chihuahua and a Saint Bernard. And that's all through genetics and breeding and controlling and adjusting. And that was over a relatively short time compared to the human evolution aspect of
sharing a similar traits as apes and having it happen over millions of years. Time is really hard concept for people to understand, and there's just, you have to find alternate ways to explain that. But when it comes to like climate change and some of the other stuff, it's just, it takes time, and people are impatient now.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not like the quote unquote the old days, I guess. But yeah, you're right. People are impatient. So I guess when something like that happens, you get someone who just does not believe what you're saying. I guess you just agree to disagree and go on, and not.
Well, what's not even go on, it's just you I say go for minor small victories, or you're trying to explain, because it's like everybody just throws a topic out and then that's it, and it's not looking for specifics within that you can actually find agreement on. Like, you know, you're trying to explain what impacts climate change has, and it's kind of the same talking points of sea level rise and more wildfires, more extreme weather, but like what necessarily does that mean? You can go smaller and say, well, you know, if you're in California, you can talk about pine beetle and how it's decimating the forests, and the reason it's spreading is because in winter bugs die off or slow their migration, and now as temperatures are warmer, as you're moving up higher and higher latitudes, the bugs are able to spread more, and therefore they're having a greater impact. And you can see as you're moving up the state and into Oregon and elsewhere that it's spreading based off of the fact that things are warmer now than what they used to be. So you're using bugs as an analogy for climate change, but it's about using different tacks if necessary. If your job is to convince somebody, you have to be creative and patient.
Okay. I can't see any other question. We've got a couple people who keep asking the same question, so I'm not going to go there. One thing I wanted to mention to you, and actually to the audience in general, I'm sure you've heard of Katharine Hayhoe. That's Hayhoe. She's a climate scientist at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, and she has made a number of YouTube videos. And because one of the things she likes to do is to talk to audiences she knows are not accepting of the science behind climate change, and she can get through to people. And I know she has some videos, so if you go onto YouTube and Google Katharine Hayhoe, again, that's Hayhoe, some of her things will come up. She's had some TED Talks and other things. Unfortunately, I don't think she gets out too much anymore, because I know threats have been made on her life, and in fact, colleagues I know at Texas Tech aren't even sure where her office is anymore, because she's had some serious threats. But anyway, I think she's been successful to a large degree, and again, relating to people on a one-on-one basis, and just seeming like a regular person. So I'll just throw that out. Might be useful to some people.
Yeah, so, no, that's the piggyback on that for a second. Sure. Part of it is actually is doing something and not just kind of complaining about it. So yeah. If your job is, or your focus is, I want people to understand climate change is real, don't just bitch about it to your friends. Actually set up opportunities to speak to people. Go to local neighborhood associations, go to churches, go to YMCA, like actually engage people. There's a kind of perception that it's all or nothing. Like if I don't go viral and talk to 4 million people at once, I'm not making a difference. No, it's the grassroots thing. Is just start small, start the dialogue, start the conversation, and then from there you can actually build up to having a presence and having a platform. Don't just get angry and not do anything about it. If it's that important to you, do something about it. Set up a YouTube show, set up a talking circuit, set up a mailing list, write a newsletter, do something about it. Build those relationships, build that communication.
That sounds very good. That's great advice. I don't have any more questions up there. And you've got no more graphics to show, like fire and $14 million paintings. So Steve, I want to thank you for an excellent presentation. This was all, of course, I'd heard you talk a couple months ago here at OSU and said, I got to get this guy for a webinar, and I want to thank you. I know how busy you are. And best of luck in all your future endeavors. And I know our paths will cross again, and thank you very much again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and thank you everybody who's still out there, and we'll see you 4 weeks from today. Jerry Selkie on IWRM modeling. Okay, good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Lisa.